Hey everyone, ready to unlock some seriously cool ways to make English a part of your everyday life?
Sounds intriguing.
We're diving deep into a script today for an educational podcast called English Every Day, and it's full of practical tips.
Uh-oh. Sounds like homework.
No, not homework. Think more like fun little hacks you can sprinkle into your day.
Okay, I'm listening. What kind of hacks?
Well, we're talking about everything from simple things like switching your phone's language to English to this really cool technique called shadowing.
Shadowing. Like following someone around.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's more about mimicking podcast hosts. It's all about immersing yourself in the language.
Oh, interesting. I can see how that would help with pronunciation and stuff.
Exactly. And the best part is you can do it anytime, anywhere,
Yeah.
on your commute, while you're cooking dinner, even in the shower if you're feeling adventurous.
Uh-huh. Maybe not the shower, but I get your point. It's about finding those little pockets of time we all have and using them to our advantage.
Exactly. But here's the thing I've always wondered about these mini practice sessions. Do they really make a difference in the long run? I mean, is it as effective as, say, sitting down for a dedicated hour of study?
That's a great question, and it's actually where the science of language acquisition comes in. You see, our brains are wired to learn through repetition and exposure.
So the more we interact with the language, even in small doses, the stronger those neural connections become.
Exactly. Think of it like working out a muscle. Short, frequent workouts can actually be more effective than one intense session a week.
Okay, I can see the analogy there. But doesn't it get a bit, well, boring doing the same types of exercises every day?
That's where the English Everyday podcast really shines. They emphasize this concept called comprehensible input.
Comprehensible input. Sounds a bit technical.
It's actually quite simple. It means exposing yourself to content that's challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that it feels overwhelming.
That sweet spot. I know exactly what you mean.
Right. And the best way to find that sweet spot is to start with topics you already love, whether it's sports, music, or even reality TV.
So it's about finding that intersection between our passions and the language we're trying to learn.
Exactly. When you're genuinely interested in the topic, the learning feels more like a fun exploration than a chore.
And the English Everyday podcast actually gives some really concrete examples of how to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely. They break it down by skill, starting with listening. Podcasts and audiobooks are their top recommendations.
I'm a huge podcast fan myself. But with so many options out there, it can feel a bit daunting to know where to start.
That's totally understandable. The key is to choose podcasts that match your current level and interests. There are tons of podcasts specifically designed for English language learners.
That makes sense. So start simple and gradually work your way up to more challenging content.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment. Sample a few different podcasts and see what resonates with you. The goal is to find something that keeps you coming back for more.
Okay, I'm on board with that. Now, the podcast also mentions this technique called shadowing, which sounds a bit intimidating, to be honest.
I know, right? It sounds a bit like, stalking someone.
Uh-huh, yeah. But it's actually not as creepy as it sounds.
Exactly. It's all about mimicking what you hear. So you listen to a short segment of audio and then you try to repeat it, matching the speaker's intonation, rhythm, and pronunciation as closely as possible.
Ah, I see. So it's kind of like creating a vocal mirror of what you're hearing.
Exactly. It might feel a bit awkward at first, but trust me, it gets easier with practice. And it's incredibly effective for improving your pronunciation and fluency.
It sounds like a fun way to really embody the language. But what about those of us who are more visual learners? Are there any strategies for making listening practice more engaging for our eyes?
Oh, definitely. A simple but effective technique is to use subtitles while watching movies or TV shows in English.
Ah, that's a good one. It helps to see the words visually while you're hearing them.
Exactly. And you can even pause the video and jot down any new words or phrases that catch your eye. It turns passive viewing into an active learning experience.
I love that. Okay, so we've got listening covered. What about reading? I'll be honest, sometimes even the thought of opening a book in English feels overwhelming.
I hear you. But here's the thing. The English Everyday podcast isn't suggesting we tackle War and Peace right away.
Okay, that's a relief. So what do they recommend?
They suggest starting with small, manageable chunks of text. Think news snippets, blog posts, even those captions on social media.
Oh, that's much more approachable. I can definitely handle a few social media captions a day.
Right. And the beauty is, these short snippets are often packed with colloquialisms and everyday language that we wouldn't necessarily find in a textbook.
So it's a way to expose ourselves to more authentic, real-world English.
Exactly. And the more we encounter these words and phrases in context, the more likely we are to remember them and use them naturally in our own conversations.
It's like building a vocabulary bank one deposit at a time. Now, I know the English Everyday podcast also had some clever tips for incorporating reading into our daily routines,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. One of my favorite suggestions is to simply change the language settings on your phone to English.
Wow, that's sneaky, but brilliant. It's like immersing yourself in the language without even really trying.
Exactly. You're constantly encountering English, even if it's just checking the weather or scrolling through your messages.
I love that. Okay, we've talked about listening and reading, but what about writing? That feels like a whole other beast to tackle.
It definitely can be. But the English Everyday podcast offers some really great tips for making writing practice less daunting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
One suggestion that really resonated with me is the idea of daily journaling. And it's not about writing perfectly crafted essays here.
So, no pressure to be the next Shakespeare.
Absolutely not. It's more about getting your thoughts and ideas down on paper in English, even if it's just a few sentences about your day or something you're grateful for.
Ah, so it's more about building fluency and finding your voice in English than about grammatical perfection.
Exactly. It's your space to experiment, make mistakes, and just play with the language.
That takes the pressure off. Okay, so journaling is in. But what if I want to get more creative with my writing?
Well, the English Everyday podcast has some fun ideas for that too. They suggest trying short stories, using writing prompts, even posting on social media in English.
Oh, I like that. So there are lots of ways to make writing practice more fun and engaging. But let's face it, the elephant in the room for many English learners is speaking.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Speaking can feel so intimidating, especially when you're just starting out.
Right. It's like that fear of making mistakes in front of others.
Exactly. But the English Everyday podcast argues that even speaking practice can be incorporated into your daily routine in really low pressure ways.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, one of their suggestions is to simply talk to yourself in English.
Wait, seriously? I thought talking to yourself was a sign of, losing it.
It might sound strange, but there's actually a psychological basis for it.
Really?
Yes. Vygotsky, the famous developmental psychologist, found that children often talk to themselves as a way of processing information and problem solving. And this self-talk actually helps them internalize new knowledge and skills.
So by talking to ourselves in English, we're essentially mimicking that natural learning process.
Precisely. It's like a mental rehearsal for real-life conversations, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become with forming sentences and expressing yourself in English.
I never thought of it that way.
Oh,
So all those times I was muttering to myself in English, I was actually engaging in some serious language learning.
you got it. And the beauty is, there's no judgment when you're talking to yourself. You can experiment with new words and phrases, make mistakes, and just have fun with the language.
This is mind-blowing. Okay, so self-talk is in. But what are some other ways to ease into speaking practice without feeling too much pressure?
The English Everyday podcast also recommends things like language exchange apps, which connect you with native speakers for conversation practice. You can also record yourself speaking and listen back to identify areas for improvement.
Ah, that's a great idea. It's like having your own personal language coach in your pocket.
Exactly. And you can even try role-playing common scenarios, like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions to build your confidence for real-life situations.
These are all such practical and accessible tips. I'm feeling so much more empowered to make speaking a regular part of my routine. But let's be real for a moment. Staying motivated on this language learning journey can be tough. How do we keep that momentum going?
That's such an important point. And the English Everyday podcast offers a really simple but powerful strategy. Track your progress.
Track our progress, like keep a diary of every new word we learn.
It can be as simple as that. Or you could keep a journal of conversations you've had in English, or even just mark off days on a calendar when you've practiced.
So it's about making our efforts tangible, giving ourselves credit for those small wins along the way.
Exactly. It's so easy to get discouraged when we're only focused on the end goal. But by celebrating those mini milestones, we create a sense of accomplishment and keep ourselves motivated to keep going.
This is so insightful. I love the idea of turning language learning into a series of small, achievable victories. And the best part is, those small wins eventually add up to big results.
Absolutely. And remember, even on those days when you feel like you're not making progress, just showing up and putting in the effort is a win in itself.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. We've explored the why of daily practice, looked at practical strategies for all four skills, and even tackled the tricky topic of staying motivated.
It's been a fantastic deep dive so far. Okay, so how about we put some of these ideas into practice now with a few examples from the English Everyday script. They have some really cool role-playing scenarios.
Role-playing, you mean like acting out situations?
Exactly. But it's not about putting on a big theatrical production or anything like that. Think of it more as like mini simulations of everyday conversations.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. So what kind of scenarios are we talking about here?
Well, one example they give is using a news article for reading practice.
So instead of just passively reading the news, we're actively engaging with it.
hmm
How does the role-playing come in?
Well, you can have one person act as the teacher and the other as the student. The teacher guides the student through the article, asking comprehension questions and helping them understand the main points.
I like that. It's like having a built-in steady buddy to bounce ideas off of.
Exactly. And it makes the whole reading process more interactive and engaging.
It's like turning news into a game.
Ugh.
I can see how that would be fun and helpful. What other kinds of role-playing scenarios did they suggest?
Another one that stood out to me was practicing correcting writing mistakes.
Ooh, that's a good one. I know I make my fair share of grammar mistakes when writing in English.
But we all do. It's part of the learning process.
But it can be so embarrassing to have someone point out your mistakes.
I know, right? But in this role-playing scenario, it's done in a really supportive and constructive way. One person writes a sentence with a common grammar error, and the other gently points it out and helps them correct it.
So it's more about collaborative learning than about criticizing each other.
Exactly. It creates a safe space to practice and learn from those inevitable mistakes we all make.
I like that approach a lot. What other role-playing situations did they come up with?
One that I think many English learners will relate to is ordering food at a cafe.
Oh, I've definitely had some awkward moments trying to order food in English.
Me too. It can be so nerve-wracking, especially when you're not sure of the vocabulary or how to pronounce things correctly.
Right, and it feels like everyone's staring at you while you're trying to stumble through your order.
Exactly. But with this role-playing activity, you can practice the whole ordering process in a safe and relaxed environment. Oh, that's a great idea. So you could practice things like greeting the server, asking about the menu, placing your order, and making sure you get everything right.
Exactly. And the more you practice those everyday phrases and interactions, the more confident you'll feel when you're out in the real world.
This whole role-playing thing is starting to sound really fun and effective. I'm definitely going to try some of these scenarios out.
I think you'll be surprised how much they can help. And remember, it's all about making the learning process more engaging and enjoyable.
Now, speaking of staying engaged, let's circle back to something the English Everyday podcast talked a lot about: tracking progress. Why is it so important, and how can we make it more tangible?
Tracking progress is crucial because it gives us a sense of accomplishment and helps us stay motivated.
But it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day grind and feel like we're not making any headway.
I know what you mean. But even small steps forward are worth celebrating. And by actually writing down our progress, we make it more real and visible.
So what are some specific ways we can track our progress? The podcast suggests things like keeping a vocabulary journal where you write down new words you've learned.
So like a little treasure chest of new words.
Exactly. And you can also keep a record of conversations you've had in English, noting what went well and what you could improve on.
Oh, that's a great idea. It turns those conversations into learning opportunities.
And even something as simple as marking off days on a calendar when you've practiced can be incredibly motivating. It shows you that you're building a consistent habit.
It's like those workout trackers that show you how many steps you've taken or how many calories you've burned. Seeing those numbers can be really motivating.
Absolutely. It gives you a sense of accomplishment and shows you that your efforts are paying off.
I love these ideas. It's all about making those small wins more visible and celebrating them along the way.
Exactly. And when we celebrate those small wins, we're reinforcing those positive feelings associated with learning, which makes us more likely to keep going.
It's like giving ourselves a little pat on the back for all our hard work.
Exactly. And remember, every step you take on this language learning journey is a step in the right direction.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. I'm excited to explore those bigger picture takeaways you mentioned earlier, the ones that go beyond specific tips and techniques. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. English every day emphasizes having the right mindset when it comes to language learning.
It's not just about memorizing grammar rules or vocabulary lists then.
Not at all. It's about approaching language learning with curiosity and a sense of adventure.
Okay, I like the sound of that. So what's the first big picture idea that stood out to you?
Well, one that really resonated with me was the importance of choosing learning materials that genuinely interest you.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I've definitely had those moments where I forced myself to study topics that just put me to sleep.
It happens to the best of us, but when you're passionate about something, the learning just flows so much more naturally, doesn't it?
It's like the difference between eating a delicious meal and choking down something you hate.
Exactly. And the English Everyday podcast really encourages us to think about language learning as a journey of discovery rather than a chore.
So instead of forcing myself to read dry textbook passages, I could be reading articles about, travel or music or
Yeah.
whatever lights me up.
Precisely. When you're genuinely engaged with the material, you're more likely to absorb the language effortlessly. It becomes a part of your life rather than something you have to force yourself to do.
I love that. So finding that intersection between our interests and the language we're learning is key.
Absolutely. And this applies to all aspects of language practice, from choosing podcasts and books to even just the topics you choose to talk about.
It's about making English a part of who you are rather than just something you study, right?
Exactly. Now, another crucial aspect they emphasize is embracing mistakes.
Ugh, that's a tough one. I'm such a perfectionist and I hate making mistakes, especially when I'm speaking English in front of others.
I totally get it, but the English Everyday podcast encourages us to view mistakes not as failures, but as valuable feedback.
Feedback, how so?
Well, each time we make a mistake, it's an opportunity to learn and improve, right? It's like having a personal language coach who's pointing out areas where we can grow.
Hmm, never thought of it that way. So instead of beating myself up over mistakes, I should see them as stepping stones on my language learning journey.
Exactly. And remember, even native speakers make mistakes from time to time. It's all part of being human.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better.
Yeah.
So it's about finding that balance between striving for accuracy and being kind to ourselves when we inevitably stumble.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another key takeaway: consistency.
I knew you were going to say that. Consistency is key for pretty much everything we want to achieve in life.
It's true. And language learning is no exception. It's not about cramming in a bunch of study sessions right before a test or a trip. It's about weaving those little practices into our daily lives and making them a habit.
It's like brushing our teeth or exercising regularly, right? We don't expect to see results overnight, but over time, those consistent actions make a huge difference.
Exactly. And the English Everyday podcast even suggests finding creative ways to integrate English practice into activities you already do, like listening to podcasts on your commute or watching movies with subtitles.
Those are great ideas. It's like sneaking in a workout without even realizing you're exercising.
Precisely. It's about making English a natural and enjoyable part of your everyday life.
Wow, this has been such an inspiring deep dive. We've explored so many practical tips and strategies, but I think what's really resonated with me are these bigger picture ideas about mindset, embracing mistakes, and making English a consistent part of our lives.
I agree. It's been a fantastic journey exploring these concepts together.
And you know what? I think the beauty of language learning is that it's a lifelong journey. There's always something new to discover and explore.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep having fun with it English. This has been The Deep Dive signing off for now. Happy learning, everyone.
Yeah.